Welcome back to Legitimate Targets, everybody. I hope you're all having a great day. There is a lot to worry about the future of Syria. The Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, recently warned that we could be weeks away from civil war in the country after the fall of President Assad and his replacement by former Al-Qaeda leader, Mr. al-Jolani. Joining me today to discuss all of this and more is a man who's doing a lot of good work in the UK. He's the deputy leader of the Workers' Party of Britain. He was the United Kingdom's ambassador to Syria and Bahrain before he joined at the United Nations to work on refugee issues. And he is a very, very well-known and established Middle East expert. So thank you so much for joining me today. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you, Jackson. I'm delighted to be invited onto your famous show.
Well, it's a great honor to have you here. And frankly, I'm following the situation in Syria with very close eyes. What do you think about Marco Rubio's statements that there could be civil war in the near future? And we'll talk about the history in a moment, but that's a big statement coming from the Secretary of State.
Well, certainly the situation in Syria remains unstable. Militarily, the jihadis are in 90% control, I would say, but there are pockets of Syria where their writ does not run. And given the way they have been comporting themselves, running effectively pogroms on Christians and Alawites and Shia and Druze, that's not surprising. They've met stiff resistance, particularly on the part of the Druze forces in the south of Syria, and also pockets of resistance in the Alawite coastland around Latakia and Tartus. There's also the Kurdish question, which remains unresolved with that powerful, previously, possibly still, US-backed proxy militia force of the so-called Syrian Democratic Forces, the Kurdish militia, still armed to the teeth and demanding autonomy. So the ingredients are certainly there for more strife, and much will depend on to what extent Sharar can assert himself over some of his unruly followers, to what extent he wants to assert himself. Is he still the rabid jihadi of the last 15 years, or has he really turned into a statesman?
Mm-hmm. And, you know, you mentioned that there's all these crazy jihadis and quite literally terrorists that have taken over a lot of the country. And you also mentioned all the different ethnic groups and militias. But amongst the, I guess you could say, the followers of Shahara Jolani, could we see some civil unrest even between their own ranks? Are they fully unified? I see that al-Jolani is walking around and he's wearing bulletproof vests. He's saying he won't go to a lot of public events in his own country. Could there be, battles between their own ranks?
Absolutely, and that's an astute observation. When you look at the history of these jihadi movements, the number of splinter groups that have emerged, the amount of internecine killing that has gone on, and I suspect this leopard hasn't changed its spot. But there are countervailing forces. Sharar Jolani is well protected. Reports suggest that he even has some Western military contractors looking after his safety because he doesn't trust anybody, even from his own community. He's well protected, and he also has something political going for him. He is able to show to ordinary Syrians some prospect for hope, economic hope, abandonment of sovereignty. But for Syrians today, after more than a decade of strife, some sense of being able to aspire to an ordinary economic life, get a job, get a life, literally, is a big offer. And he's receiving a lot of support from the Gulf countries, from Turkey. The prospect is there for a prosperous Syria, maybe not an honorable Syria, maybe no longer a Syria which is the beating heart of Arabism, a Syria which has sold its soul, if you like, but it does have the makings of an economic success. All it would need is a couple of years of stability, the end of sanctions, which appears to be happening, and an influx of tourism, if conditions are secure enough. Agriculture can resume, oil production can resume. It does have the making of a success story if these political internal problems can be solved with wisdom and statesmanship.
It's going to be very interesting to watch. What did you make of Jolani's trip to meet with President Trump? I believe it was in Saudi Arabia with Mohammed bin Salman. And there were reports that by 2026, if things remain stable and continue to stabilize further in Syria, that Jolani would move forward with normalization with the Zionist entity. Do you think that that's a sincere possibility here? And are you surprised by a move such as that?
What surprised me more was that Trump seems ready to ignore the Israeli lobby and lift sanctions. This seems to be now a given. And it surprised me because until now, Trump has not shown much willingness to face down the Zionist lobby. And that lobby was pushing strongly to prevent the lifting of sanctions from Syria. Correctly, I think the lobby sees Syria as a potential long-term threat to Israel. This is a country which is still 10% occupied by Syria. The Golan problem is not going to go away. And at some point in the future, a Syrian government, perhaps not Jolani's government, but a future Syrian government, is going to return to the fray on the stolen territory of the Golan. So I'm pleased in a way that sanctions are being lifted for the sake of the suffering of the Syrian people, and pleased that the Zionist lobby are being faced down on this issue, at least. But Israel will not take yes for an answer. There's no amount of abasement by Syria which would satisfy the Zionists. So even if they said they wanted normalization, I'm not sure Israel would even want it because they want to keep Syria down, Syria weak and divided. And I'm sure that will continue to be the thrust of the Zionist effort as regards Syria. But it looks like the United States, for once, is seeing its own interest in having a more stable and prosperous and normal Syria.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, as a former ambassador to Syria, when did you first realize what was going on here with the plans that the West had, that CIA, MI6, NATO, Turkey. When did you first become aware of these plans? And as a second part to this question, do your friends in diplomatic circles that you worked with, presumably, do they understand what is happening today in Syria and what just took place over the past, 6 months with the fall of Assad, and now what it means that Jolani is the new president of Syria?
Well, to answer the first question, when did I first become aware? Well, right from the beginning, it was clear to me, and I was stationed in just down the road in Jordan at the time, at the beginning of the Arab Spring. I was working for the UN, but still very much in contact with Syria. It was clear from the outset that there was a Western plan to ensure that the Arab Spring spread more or less like a pack of dominoes across from North Africa, through Libya, Egypt, and it seemed to Western observers inevitable that the Syrian domino would fall. And they worked hard at the beginning to make sure that it would fall, or so they hoped. And so in Jordan, I was actually meeting socially British military personnel who were involved in training the jihadis. They'd say things like, "You're not going to believe what I did today, Peter. I trained a jihadi." So I was almost a first-hand witness to the subversion and the plotting that went on. And so from day one, the peaceful protests were rapidly turned into armed insurrection headed by jihadis.
As for
today, your second question, I fear that my former diplomatic colleagues are in denial. They don't want to see that they've brought about a dreadful thing in the advent of an Al-Qaeda regime, which some of us have been warning about for a decade. And this is what has happened. The personnel in charge of the Syrian Republic are ex so-called terrorists, ex-Al-Qaeda, even ex-ISIS. And if they thought they could get away with more massacring and more jihadism, they would do it like a shot. They're only being restrained to some extent by the self-interest of the new president and public opinion, because public opinion in Syria, having glimpsed what normality might be like, they want that. And the jihadis are losing the street.
Mm-hmm. It was tragic to see the videos of the Alawites and what was being done unto them by these terrorists. Fortunately, it seems as though the worst of that has settled down for the time being. One thing that is very concerning to me for the longevity of Syria's sovereignty and economic prosperity, of which they don't have much of any right now, but could one day, is the decision that Syria's state assets. What do you think this is going to mean for Syria long term, that he's decided to take a measure such as this?
Well, Syria is at a crossroads at the moment. It seems that Shara wants to go down the road of turning Syria into a kind of Gulf principality, with the focus on investment and normalization of economic life. But the other fork goes down the road of jihadism and venting of revenge on the minority communities. And Syria's future will depend on which fork Syria takes. My guess would be that, barring accidents like an assassination of the leadership, that they will go down that path of gradual normalization of conditions in Syria. In a way, it helps Syria that it's no longer part of any military effort against Israel. They're not going to waste money on the army because they no longer have an army to speak of. And in one sense, this is a blessing in the confrontation front countries, confrontation against Syria. So much of national resources has gone into military effort. Syria, in a sense, is spared this now. Their army has been demolished. There is no hope of recreating a strong Syrian army capable of confronting any external aggressor. The army will just be for internal pacification. Some would say it was always like that, and even under Assad, he never pointed the army against Israel. I remember having conversations with his foreign minister, Farouk Shara, asking mischievously, well, why don't you make some trouble on the Golan if you want to get any of it back? And he said, you must be mad. We can't confront the Israelis. They would destroy Damascus. So in a sense, it's not wholly a bad thing that Syria doesn't have to spend billions on its army. It can, given the right vision and the right leadership, focus on economic prosperity. And I think this is the future for ordinary Syrian people. They may lose the sense of mission, in that previously there was the feeling that Syria was the beating heart of Arabism, that it was key to Syrian identity to confront Israel, to support Palestine. But all that, it seems, is now in the past, virtually dead and buried. But what they do have is the prospect of simply getting a life. And most Syrians, I have to say, seem up for that.
Do you know if there are any updates about the Russian naval base in Tartus, I believe it's called? I understand, though, that there's this was tricky to me, so maybe you can explain this as well. There's a commercial port there at Tartus, and then there's a military port there. So I saw news reports this past week that the UAE had won some contracts to renovate the port, and a lot of people took that to mean that the UAE was taking over the military port and renovating that. But as I understand, it's just the commercial port. What do you think is going on here, and what do you think the future of this military port is?
Well, I suspect that it will no longer have much purpose as a military port. It would be very unwise on the part of the Russians to install a sensitive military base even if they were allowed to do so, in the heart of a key part of the U.S. Middle East imperium, which is what Syria is bidding to be. The whole thrust of Shara's strategy is to make himself indispensable to America. He is more or less throwing himself at Trump's feet, and nothing is too much for Trump to ask. And that seems to be working, in the sense that Trump has faced down the Israeli lobby over sanctions. And Rubio seems keen to see Syria as part of the US imperium. It makes no sense for the Russians to have a base in such a country. I think that moment has passed. There was a moment a few months ago when it wasn't clear whether Syria wanted to play Russia against America. Now they've gone in 100% with America. Russia just wants to up sticks if they have any sense. And the port, possibly even the military part of it, will be wholly commercial.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Were you surprised? You mentioned that this new Syrian government is abandoning its role, I guess, however small it was, as a member of the axes of resistance. This is going to manifest in various ways. One of the biggest might be the difficulties that people will now face as they try to smuggle weapons into the south of Lebanon, if anyone can even do that still, across Syria. But were you surprised to see that this new government is now arresting members of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad and the PFLP who were stationed in Syria, and they were outlawing their operations in Damascus and throughout the country?
Well, we should not be surprised because when they were simple jihadis, they never showed much enthusiasm for the Palestinian cause. Ideologically, any nationalism is anathema to a full-blown jihadi who's only interested in the ummah, the wider Islamic community. And I've seen videos of them literally wiping their feet on the Palestinian flag. And this was years ago. So ideologically, it makes a certain sense. Tactically, they accepted, when they were in opposition, some support from Hamas out of Sunni solidarity, but they were never very fond of Hamas, and it comes as no surprise to me to see that they've gone the whole hog and are trying to suppress any manifestations of Palestinian nationalism. And this is in their self-interest as well. They are bidding to be what Israel is often reckoned to be, as the US beachhead at the heart of the Middle East. I mean, it was always nonsense to see Israel as a US asset. It's been a liability. The US has been dragged into Israel's conflicts, but Syria can be a real asset to the US.
Yes, I agree. I think they'll probably do just about whatever the United States asks of them, as you said, at this point. It's of course a big shame, and it's terrible to watch what's happening there. But I hope if there's anything good that can come out of this, it's some economic hope for the people there. We'll have to wait and see. Who knows what's going to happen? No one knows. Anything could happen any day now. And obviously, Jolani's in a very precarious position. As a last question for you, do you think that Jolani has the capacity to keep the peace in Syria? You said earlier that in the first response that you had to one of my questions, you said that maybe he wants to maintain order, maybe there's not the urge to maintain order, who knows. But do you think it's even possible at this point to do something like that? Even in I had a friend the other day, even in the south of the country, there's still, the maps are moving. It was the FSA, I think they took some more territory in the south of the country just 2 weeks ago or something. what do you think the future is for Jolani here?
That's a hard question to answer. We have a very imperfect hold on the data, but as far as I can judge, and based on his track record, he's likely to. This is similar to a situation he faced in Idlib. He basically cut his teeth on statesmanship by taking gradual control of Idlib. And to do that, he had to have a number of purges. There were splits in the jihadi movement, and he emerged the strong man. And now he has the resources of the state behind him, not least access to money, Gulf money in particular. I suspect that he will prevail, but he will not. We're only 6 months in. You know, it was only December when he took control. I think he's cutting his more radical followers some slack, but he will gradually rein them in.
Well, we will continue watching with a very close eye. And Peter Ford, I hope to speak with you again soon about developments on this matter, and hopefully also about developments with the Workers' Party of Britain. You guys are doing incredible work. So thank you so much for joining me today. And I salute you in your efforts in Britain. Where should people follow you online if they would like to stay up to date with your work and everything that you are doing with the Workers' Party?
Yeah, well, I'm on Twitter, Peter Ford WPB, or on the Workers' Party of Britain website.
Very good. Very good. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.